It is January 1886 on the Dakota prairie. Outside, the temperature is 40 degrees below zero. The wind is a predator, clawing at the door frame, probing for weakness. Inside, the fire gives off a dull red glow. Every log is counted, every ember guarded. The snow is already up to the window sills, and spring is more than 2 months away.
In the American West of the 1800s, summer was a race to prepare because winter was coming. And winter out here was not a gentle visitor. It was a siege. The land could be breathtaking, endless skies over the Dakota plains, mountain valleys in Montana, rolling hills in Wyoming. But from November to March, the cold could come down like a hammer. Temperatures of -40 were not rare. Winds reached 60 miles per hour. Snow could pile higher than the eaves of your home. And unlike towns back east, frontier settlements had no guarantee of resupply. Roads became impassable, rivers froze solid, and a blizzard could strand a family for weeks at a time. Yet thousands of families, farmers, ranchers, trappers, homesteaders, not only endured these winters, they built their lives around them. Survival came down to 5 essentials: a warm shelter, a reliable source of heat, clothing that could fight the cold, food that would last the season, and the protection of their animals. In this story, we'll step into their world, see how they did it. On the frontier, you built with what you had, and you built for survival first. In forested regions, log cabins were the most common choice. Settlers felled pine, spruce, or cottonwood and shaped the logs with broad axes. Each log was notched at the ends so it locked into the next, forming tight corners. Between the logs, the gaps were filled with chinking, a mixture of clay, mud, straw, and sometimes moss or animal hair. This kept the wind from whistling through. But a cabin was rarely airtight. In January, you might still feel a thin draft against your cheek if you stood near the wall. To fight that, some families hung quilts or buffalo hides along the inside, turning the walls into soft, insulated barriers. The hides gave off a faint, musky smell, a reminder that warmth sometimes came with the scent of the hunt. On the treeless prairies, settlers had to improvise. Sod houses, soddies, were built from thick slabs of prairie turf cut with a spade. The roots of the grasses held the soil together, creating blocks that could be stacked into walls 2 feet thick. They were cool in summer, warm in winter, but came with quirks. After heavy rain or snowmelt, damp could seep through, and sometimes green shoots sprouted from the inside walls by spring. Then there were dugouts, built right into the side of a hill or creek bank. These were cheap, quick, and remarkably warm thanks to the insulating power of the earth. The downside? They were dark, sometimes damp, and prone to insect visitors. But in the heart of winter, a dugout's steady temperature could mean the difference between shivering and sleeping soundly.
A well-built home was only the first step. Without heat, it was just a cold box in the snow. In the earliest cabins, an open hearth was the norm. A stone or brick fireplace could throw off pleasant warmth if you sat close, but the heat faded fast the further you moved from the fire, and much of it escaped straight up the chimney. By the mid to late 1800s, cast iron stoves became a treasured upgrade. Heavy, black, and squat, they could hold heat for hours once loaded with wood or coal. They also doubled as cooking surfaces, with removable plates on top where pots could sit. A good stove was often the most expensive thing in a frontier home, sometimes costing more than the rest of the furnishings combined. Fuel was life. In timber country, families spent summer and autumn felling trees, splitting logs, and stacking them in neat piles to season. In the open plains, Where wood was scarce, buffalo chips, dried bison dung, were collected by the wagon load. They burned hot and clean, with surprisingly little smell, though many settlers never got used to the idea. When buffalo herds dwindled, people turned to twisted bundles of hay, corn stalks, or even dried sunflowers to feed the stove. To stretch heat, rooms were closed off in winter. Families might live almost entirely in one or two spaces, hanging thick quilts across doorways and clustering beds close to the fire. Some even set up warming tents inside the cabin, small enclosures of blankets around a bed to trap body heat at night. On the coldest mornings, frost might still form on the inside of the walls. Delicate, glittering patterns melted at the touch. Once you stepped outside, clothing became your shelter. And in the West, it wasn't fashion that mattered, it was function. Wool was the gold standard. Thick, dense, and able to insulate even when wet, wool was used for socks, mittens, coats, and blankets. Families who could keep sheep spun their own yarn, knitting warm garments by lamplight during the long evenings. Fur was equally prized. Buffalo robes, heavy, shaggy hides, served as both coats and bedding. Beaver and raccoon fur lined hoods and mittens. In colder mountain regions, wolf or coyote fur trim helped keep wind from biting the face. Many settlers adopted indigenous designs for footwear, wearing moccasins layered with wool liners or fur inserts. These were light, flexible, and warmer than stiff leather boots in deep snow. Some were so well made they could last a whole season without repair. Layering was the key. A man might wear long underwear, a flannel shirt, a wool vest, and a buffalo hide coat over it all. Women layered petticoats and skirts, then wrapped themselves in heavy shawls or quilted capes. Children were bundled until they could barely move. Scarves wound high so that only their eyes peeked out. Mittens tied together so they wouldn't be lost in the snowdrifts. Inside, clothes were often hung near the fire overnight. The smell of wood smoke clinging to them, a scent every homesteader carried through winter. In the heart of winter, you couldn't just walk to a store. The nearest trading post might be 20 miles away and buried in snow. If you hadn't put enough food away by late fall, you were in trouble. Root cellars were the frontier's refrigerators. Dug into a hillside or sunk into the ground, they stayed cool but not freezing, the earthen walls holding a steady temperature. Inside, shelves were lined with potatoes, carrots, parsnips, and turnips. Cabbages might be wrapped in paper and stacked in bins. Lantern light revealed rows of jars filled with summer's bounty, peaches in syrup, pickled beans, and berry preserves sealed under wax. Meat was preserved with equal care. Hams and sides of bacon were smoked until the flesh turned a deep mahogany color, the air around them heavy with the scent of hickory or cottonwood. Others salted their meat, packing it in barrels where the crystals drew out moisture and kept rot at bay. On the coldest nights, the stove became the heart of the home in more ways than one. A heavy cast-iron pot might simmer with stew, venison or beef, onions from the cellar, carrots cut thick so they wouldn't dissolve, biscuits baked in a Dutch oven, the smell filling the single heated room. Nothing was wasted. Breadcrumbs became dumplings. Fat skimmed from boiled meat was saved to fry tomorrow's potatoes. Even coffee grounds might be boiled twice before being fed to the compost heap, or, in lean times, dried and reused yet again. Food wasn't just fuel. In the bleak midwinter,
It was comfort, warmth, and a reminder that the family was still provided for. For a frontier family, animals were more than property. They were survival partners. Horses pulled sledges and broke trails. Cows gave milk, cream, and butter. Chickens supplied eggs and, in a pinch, meat. But livestock needed care even in blizzard conditions. Barns were built with low ceilings to trap heat and were often banked with straw or snow to add insulation. Inside, animals were bedded deep in straw, their breath steaming in the lantern light. The smell was sharp: hay, manure, and the warm, musky scent of living bodies. Water was a constant struggle. Overnight, buckets froze solid. Each morning, someone had to chop ice from the troughs or haul warm water from the house. Feed had to be rationed carefully so it would last until spring. Blizzards posed the greatest danger. In the infamous winter of 1886 to 87, known to ranchers as the Big Die-Up, snow piled so high that cattle starved standing up, unable to paw through to the grass below. That disaster taught many ranchers to store more hay than they thought they'd ever need, and then store extra. Every animal saved through winter meant strength for the farm in spring. Everyone lost was a blow that might take years to recover from. These methods of survival didn't just keep people alive, they shaped entire communities. Frontier life bred cooperation. Neighbors might share a woodpile, lend a sled, or trade a side of smoked meat for a sack of flour. If someone's barn collapsed under snow, the whole settlement turned out to help rebuild. Many winter techniques were borrowed or adapted from indigenous peoples who had centuries of experience with the land's extremes. Moccasin design, teepee insulation with hides, and the use of dried meat and pemmican all influenced settler survival strategies. Settlements often sprang up where winter survival was most feasible, in sheltered valleys with timber for fuel, or near rivers where ice could be cut for storage. Winter shaped migration, planting, and even marriage patterns as people sought to build alliances that could carry them through the long months of scarcity.
In the depth of January, a family might go weeks without stepping outside, living only on what they'd stored and the warmth they could make. The wind roared in the chimney. Snow pressed against the windows. Inside, the world was reduced to the circle of firelight, the scrape of a ladle in the stew pot, the slow ticking of time. Winter on the frontier was not a romantic postcard. It was a battle of preparation, endurance, and will. Those who mastered it, those who met the season head-on and emerged in spring, had passed the hardest test the West could give. Some winters, families vanished into the snow, unseen for weeks, living entirely on what they'd stored and the warmth they could make. The West tested them hard. But for those who endured, each spring wasn't just a change of season. It was proof they'd beaten the frontier's hardest challenge.